Welcome, everybody, to this live taping of the Afikra Movie Night podcast. Our special guest is Omar Naim, who is a Lebanese-born director, writer, and documentarian, who is the person behind the latest film, Route 10, which is on Netflix. He's behind a bunch of other films that we're going to talk about, including Final Cut, Becoming, and a documentary called The Grand Theater. We're excited to have you, Omar. Welcome to Afikra Movie Night.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So we'll just jump right in with a disclosure. We've known each other for almost my entire life. And so it's really, really exciting to be able to talk to you in this capacity.
That's right. We've known each other since 89, 90. Yeah. We both ended up in Cyprus at the same school, and me and your older brother, were best friends.
Yeah. So it's cool sort of diving backwards and trying to understand some of the stories that I don't know about you, because I'm sure I have some misunderstandings about your story. So let's sort of go back to the 80s and 90s and get a sense of why you wanted to become a filmmaker, because I can't remember a time when you weren't interested in this stuff. Do you remember a time when you weren't interested in film?
It's pre-middle school. So it's, I fell in love with film. I was about 11 or 12. And before that, I wanted to be a writer or an architect, something more vague. I was reading a lot and I wanted to write. And then my mother is a theater director and actress. My father had made some films and documentaries in the 60s and 70s, but film was not the medium of the household. We didn't talk about film. My parents didn't talk about film. We didn't go to movies. I mean, we were in Jordan for my childhood, so there wasn't, at the time, very many movie theaters. Cyprus changed things a little bit because it had movie theaters and movies would come regularly, and I was old enough to start going on my own. And I was just struck by a bolt of lightning.
What was you said it wasn't the medium of the household. What was the medium of the household?
My parents talked about theater and writing, poetry, almost everything except film.
Yeah.
My dad, through work, got all the film magazines at the time. There was something at the time, kids called a magazine, which is like a printout of multiple internet pages.
What did you get? Was it Empire? What did you get?
Empire, Premiere, Movie Line, French Premiere. And I just inhaled and memorized all of them, often before the films could even arrive in Cyprus. So
yeah, because we used to get films like a year and a half late.
Exactly. They came really late, pirated copies. So I read I have a friend at our school that worked at the library, and she stole the book, the Roger Ebert book of film reviews for me, because she knows it. So I memorized that. And I don't know, something about film. First, I knew I wouldn't be able to, I would still be able to be a film director, writer without giving up my writing, because I really wanted to write. And from that point on, I was obsessed, even though I had very few opportunities to make films at that age. This was, tape to tape editing. There's no labs around in our region of the world at the time.
Yeah, of course.
So a lot of it was in my head, but I made very few films in Cyprus and in Lebanon even before I went off to film school. Just little splatterings of experiments.
Yeah. Do you remember your first cinema experience?
Going to the theater?
Yeah. Do you remember what it was?
There were I do. There were very few. Like I said, we were in Jordan. There weren't a lot of movies showing up, but the James Bond movies showed up because James Bond movies. So I think my first theatrical experience was A View to a Kill, which is not a good James Bond movie. But the movie experience that sort of knocked me on my ass was Goodfellas. Like a lot of film,
like a lot of people, yeah,
my age. Because up until that point, I didn't understand what a director did. And then when you see a film like that the director's voice is shaping the meaning, not just photographing the drama, I mean, he very much wants you to notice him, Scorsese, but he's not just doing it to be noticed. The combination of film techniques to bring you inside of inarticulate characters. That's what I thought. He's really good at that. And I'm like, oh, this is a very interesting way to use cinematic language to bring us inside people that if you don't use cinematic language, there's no way in a way.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, Ahmad. I was like, we've done a bunch of these movie nights, and I feel like there's sort of a gap in filmmakers from the Arab world, right? So I won't use the term Arab film, but filmmakers who call the Arab world home. Okay, so let's just use that term for now. I feel like there's a lot that have come up since the advent of the internet, basically, since people could start making films on their computers. And these are folks who are born squarely sort of late 80s and beyond. Kids who grew up in millennials, right? Kids who grew up in the 90s, essentially, my generation and younger. And then there's folks who are older and who are sort of in like May Mustard's generation. And they're the ones who are making films in the 70s and 80s and 90s and that stuff. And I don't know many in the middle. Right. And it's really, really funny. When I was getting ready for this, I was thinking to myself, who does Ahmad think his contemporaries are who are from the Arab world?
That's a very good question. My contemporary, I mean, Nadine Lebek is not, we're of a similar generation, and we started making films not too far apart. But, before the coalescence of the pre-internet, almost pre-war time, and then the coalescence of the internet time, there's the Civil War and after, but before the internet, where even if you had a cohort, you couldn't find them. And it's really a bunch of sort of independent strivers trying to, I mean, every story is completely different. There's almost no replication in how we became filmmakers.
Yeah.
And a lot of us were in exile and diaspora and scattered all over the place. I make films in English because I ended up in an American school because the Lebanese war started, and I just became a very good speaker of English. Yeah. And that helped open opportunities internationally. I mean, I write in English. Fundamentally, and that's just a result of history and everything that's happened. But, I have some very good friends that went to high school with me who are filmmakers now, like Fadi Baki, Fids, who made the short film Unveiled, one of the great Lebanese short films. I don't know if you've seen it. And Lina Munzer is friend for high school writing. So my high school friends, even though, even if they're writers or filmmakers, but just our little brain trust, and is very much how I see as my peers. Cool. But, my big problem is I don't feel like I belong in any particular circle here or in the Middle East or in Lebanon. So the struggle to find a community is ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thesis of afikra in many ways, which is like, can we all just meet somewhere? Yeah. And if that place is called afikra, great. And if it's called something else, fine. Can we connect with each other? I want to get back to Route 10. And for those who haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. You can watch it really easily. I'm going to play the trailer for those who are listening. And we're going to talk about it. So let's listen to the trailer.
نفسنا نكون موجودين حقيقي بابا بس شكله ما في خيرة.
حتى اليوم تكنسلت وما في رحلة إلا بكرة.
خلاص امسكوا خط أي خط.
طب أنت عارف إنه طريق 10 هذا اللي إحنا عليه أطول طريق مستقيم بالعالم.
وخر عن أهلي انقلع من هنا.
رايحين نحضر عرس بأبو ظبي وذا المجنون بيذبحنا.
مريم تعالي.
بس ليش كان بيحاول يقتلنا؟
مو مهمين اللي ورانا، عمره ما شافهم شيء.
Okay, cool. So, Ahmad, if you were trying to explain the idea to somebody, right? You were trying to pitch this story to somebody. What's the pitch?
Well, I have pitched the story to somebody.
Yeah.
So I do have a pitch somewhere, an actual pitch. But basically, it's a brother and sister estranged. Their father's getting remarried. They're driving from Riyadh to Abu Dhabi on the longest straight road in the world through the desert. And along the way, someone starts pursuing them and increasingly becomes more lethal and deadly. And they don't know why. And the external problem sort of pushes them to deal with their dramatic internal family problems. And by the end, it's about two very privileged people who realize who they are by the end. It's kind of a coming of age story. We always talked about it as also kind of fairy tale-y, like Hansel and Gretel, because the parents ultimately are the villain, or the dad.
Yeah.
Dad is the villain here. And it's like a action movie and a play crossed together. There's no other way to describe it. But that's the movie is an attempt to do something very visceral and visual, but also something human and layered and that has some subtext. But if you don't want to watch the subtext, you don't care, you can just see the cars hitting each other. That's also good.
You know, it's so funny. I was like looking through your Twitter in preparation for the conversation, and you'd posted something, I don't know, a couple of weeks back, saying these are the 4 comic books that have been like most influential in me. And it struck me that even rewatching the trailer now, I feel like there's a collection of stills that you had in your head that you're like, we're doing that. We're doing the moment with the fire extinguisher. That's just an awesome comic book moment. We're doing that. That's a cool comic book moment. We're doing that. That's a cool comic book moment. Like, do you see the connection, or is it just me?
I mean, no, there's definitely a connection. I think I love comics and they were very influential, but I definitely think in cinematic camera terms. I mean, I storyboarded the movie. I draw really badly, but I have a great storyboard partner, Omar Naim.
Amazing.
He's an artist, and we had like 100, all the major action scenes were storyboarded, and definitely her popping out of the top of the sunroof with the fire extinguisher. We're like, all right, if this movie works, if that moment works, then we're good. And seeing that movie in the theater, for the first time, well, the only time, at the Red Sea Festival in Saudi Arabia last year, when that moment happened, there was like a cheer, like people couldn't contain themselves.
Yeah.
So that felt successful. But it's almost an abstract idea. I mean, there's like a one big flat empty road with 2 vehicles, black and white, nothing else around. So you have to escalate it and complicate it, and you can't avoid the surrealism of it all. So I didn't. I mean, I find the film kind of very funny.
Yeah.
And, it builds an absurdity, and by the end, So
that's it does have this comic booky absurdity to it, right? There's this like villainous, masked man.
Right. Yeah. And it's never explained, and things just get worse and worse and worse for them to the point where it's ridiculous. Shoes get stolen and the scorpions in the car. And so trying to find that balance of funny and tense and keep them together. I mean, that's Hitchcock.
Yeah.
In essence. And I guess North by Northwest was a very much tonally influential. I mean, North by Northwest is just one goddamn thing after another. But to try to make a film of sequences and set pieces, but that accumulate to something to say about these people and their family and their who they are in their world.
So how much of this stuff, I'm always curious how much people learn, especially veterans of a profession.
Mm.
Like, what did you learn in the process of doing this film?
Well, so much. I mean, every film, you only by the end of the film have you learned how to make that film. So
Yeah.
you're like, oh, as soon as you're done, you're like, okay, now I know how to make this film. Let's start over.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never done a film with this many stunts, nowhere even close. My other films have small, running scenes or some gunplay, but nothing like this. I mean, this was almost every day we had a big, massive stunt. Great team who'd had experience before, but for me, it was new. I've never done a movie with basically just two actors locked in a room. That's the real challenge. I mean, the visual stuff is very cinematic, but how do you make two people in a car for the entirety of the movie have a shape and an arc and humor and all the things you want out of a movie, without being sort of false about it?
Yeah.
I've never worked in Saudi Arabia before. I mean, we all speak Arabic, but the dialect is very different. So learning my dialogue was translated by a Saudi writer.
So it was written in English and then translated to Arabic?
Yeah, I wrote it in English. Then I worked with a Saudi screenwriter who translated the dialogue and adapted it a little bit. And then I worked with the actors for many days, just sitting in the hotel room, colloquializing the language,
Sure.
making it their own, and me like memorizing it. I mean, I had to learn a new vernacular. The actors were great. They're both very smart cinephiles, so they knew, it was a very collaborative experience working with them.
What was the casting process like?
Well, the casting process, it's a very new cinema industry in Saudi Arabia. So there's not a massive amount of people. I'd written the script. I had a Saudi producer, and he suggested Bara, the leading man, who I didn't know, but he has a very popular YouTube channel called Filmer. And I checked that out, and he's extremely knowledgeable, very charismatic. And then he put himself on tape. And as soon as I saw him, I'm like, oh, this guy's fantastic. And then we met, and he's a big film buff, and he spoke very eloquently about the movie and what it's about underneath the events. Cool. So I didn't even see anybody else for that part. And
very
then
cool.
Fatma, I had happened to see a few years before that in Riyadh. I was teaching a screenwriting workshop. There was like an artistic conference, and she spoke about her life and career, like a little TED talk kind of thing. And I was just super impressed. And I'm just like, oh, she's, I want to work with this person if I do a movie in Saudi Arabia. And then it came up and I mentioned her. They're like, oh, she'd be great. So she also put herself on tape. Getting Saudi Arabia, it was during the coronavirus. So getting the actors out of Saudi Arabia to Abu Dhabi to film was very difficult because Saudi really closed up. Yeah. These two great actors, we couldn't get them out. So there were a lot of, we shot the height of the coronavirus before the vaccinations. So it was very, as soon as I had them both there, I was so happy. I'm like, oh, khalas, now I have a movie.
Yeah.
And really the casting, especially with a movie where there are only two people in it.
Yeah.
It's crucial. And they have to get along and need to be able to push each other and challenge each other. And so they had a great relationship. I loved working with them. Probably my favorite relationship working with actors was Farah and Fatma. Okay,
so I have a question. Just if there is like a 18-year-old wannabe writer director listening to this, and they're thinking to themselves, how long did this take from like idea in your head to wrap?
Well,
no, not to wrap, to actually be like, all right, I can show this to somebody.
Well, it takes 2 years. But this was different. This was a different experience because this, unlike my other films, which start from scratch, just I have an idea for a film, I write it and rewrite it and rewrite it, and then try to find financing. This started with the studios, Imagination and NBC, wanting to make a film like this. They wanted to make a car-based movie on this road.
Oh, I knew it started with the road. I knew it started with the quote of "This is the longest stretch straight." I knew it. I was listening to it and I was like, that's the seed for the whole film.
That's right. That was the seed, and the crazy car, the car culture of the Gulf, and there's a lot of people love cars and they get into a lot of accidents. So and I had done some writing for NBC in the past. They liked my writing. I pitched my take on this project. They liked it. And when you write a movie for a pre-existing appetite from the financiers, it'll likely get made quicker.
Yeah, for sure.
An important lesson to learn. I had to work very hard to get into that position, to be able to be the person they asked and to be able to pull it off. But this was the fastest because of that. But other movies I've done took 10 years. The final cut took 2.5. Documentary Madina was shot in 2016 and finished in 2021. Movies take a long time and require a lot of patience and a lot of work that is not creative. A lot of pummeling and pushing and waiting, and then suddenly doing something in a hurry and then waiting.
Yeah. You mentioned Final Cut. I want to talk about Final Cut. So let's go back to that moment, right? So this is around the early 2000s, right? Early 2000s, you are a fresh grad and you're trying to get this film made. Tell us about when you reflect on this, is 20 years ago. When you reflect on this now, how do you feel?
I feel that kid had some balls. That's how I feel. I can't believe I was so insistent. I was fresh out of film school. I had this idea for this movie. And something about not knowing about anything made me confident enough to say, this is a great idea. I'm not going to let it go. I'm going to parlay it into a directing career.
Okay, so in 2022, how do you explain it to people? If somebody's like, what's that movie about? How would you explain it to somebody in 2022? Because I think it does have an interesting life 20 years later, given the way the world has...
Well, you can probably know more than I do. I have no perspective. But it's a film, it takes place... It came out in 2004. It's a science fiction drama about a future where a chip can be implanted in a child while they're in the womb. And then it records their entire life through their eyes and their ears in one continuous life take. And then when a person dies, an editor called the cutter, played by Robin Williams, is supposed to sit down with the footage and sort of craft it and make some sense of it into a film to be remembered by. And in his specialty is sort of taking awful people and changing who they are. So in their rememory film, they seem like someone else.
He's a curator.
He's a curator. He's a propagandist. He's but yeah, he's an editor. And in French, it's very close to liar, which always amused me. But yeah, he's an interpreter of history. And the movie has one foot in science fiction and film noir and drama, but I was fresh out of college, so there was a lot of thinking about the power of the image and the history of filmmaking, and how history is transformed through who gets to tell the visual stories of history. And this was before social media and all that stuff, so it does seem a little bit. As time goes on, it seems more of the moment.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I wonder, like, when you look at this now, I always think back. It's funny actually now, before I ask that question, it's funny that the movie that you mentioned earlier was Goodfellas, and there's that like infinite, that sort of iconic one-er that everybody references, and you're like, in one take, your life in one take.
Right. Yeah. It's an endless Steadicam shot of a life. Exactly. I mean, it goes back to falling in love with movies at age 12. And when you fall in love with something at age 12, you're never going to fall in love with anything like you fell in love with whatever you fell in love with at age 12.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
I literally used to imagine myself as having a camera for a head and walk around, and that just led naturally, I'm sure a lot of people do, and that naturally led to, well, what if we actually put the camera in someone's head? But the editor, the person coming in to work on the material, is the second idea that's really important in that movie. It's not just the guy. It's not just that the technology exists. It's only a movie if there's this character who has to interpret it, and what that does to him. I mean, my thesis film in college was a documentary, Grand Theater, which you mentioned. So I came fresh out of the experience of working, and it's about the civil war in Lebanon, talking to different peoples who all disagreed about what exactly happened and how their experience of the war made them who they are, or their memory of the war made them who they are. So I had memory and time on the mind, and documentaries. So that idea came out of there.
I mean, it's so funny you were saying that you were this ballsy kid. How was it working and directing this star-studded cast, and in particular somebody like Robin Williams, as this like 22-year-old, chump?
Well, 22 when it started writing, 24 really when I
24-year-old.
Yeah, much different. Well, what happens is I made some short films, of course, and worked on lots of short films, but I've never really been on a big professional set before. Beyond the Robin Williams of it all, you're before you show up, you're like, okay, is my imagination of how this works accurate? Can you transpose my experiences from 6 people making a short to 56 people making a feature?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes. It's exactly the same. So as soon as you realize that this is exactly the same as me making a short film in college, except the guy in front of the camera is Robin Williams. But that first day I arrived and there were all these trucks parked. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? There's always that feeling when you write and then direct a movie of what have I done? Look at what I've made all these people do. Robin Williams was a big sci-fi lover and really warm, smart guy. He made me feel very comfortable. And thankfully, all the other actors were intimidated by him also, not just me. So he was quite used to having to, hey, I'm just an actor, calm down. So he did that to me, Caviezel and Mira Sorvino. We all grew up with, we all called him, not just me, Jim Caviezel also called him Robin Williams. And Robin's like, you can just call me Robin. So we all grew up with this guy.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
And then, so at first, he made it comfortable, and he liked the material, and he liked me. But then we quickly realized, oh, he needs me. Like I'm the, I'm not just an observer here. Obviously, I'm the director, and he wants me to direct him. And when I started making suggestions, and he would like them, that's when you're jamming and things are good. You realize, like, okay, I can introduce an idea, they'll take it and change it, make it better, bring it back to me. Directing becomes like this little brainstorming jam session between you and a few people while 100 people wait around. It's a weird mix of intimacy and public work. So, but I learned a lot in terms of what actors like. Every actor is very different, and they need different things.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, like we're talking about, like what you learned. So 20 years later, your skill set is an accumulation of all these different things you've learned over the course of all your different careers and different jobs and different perspectives. I'm curious if, like, you reflect on a movie like Final Cut. Do you ever feel like, oh, I want that shot back? Like I want to direct that same idea again. I wish no one had seen that first one because I have a cooler version of it that I want to make now. Do you ever think that?
Especially with the Final Cut, of course, because it's actually, when I made the Final Cut, I'm like, this is a movie that should not be made or written by a 24-year-old. And just in terms of what it's about, even at the time, I'm like, oh, I should remake this. Like Hitchcock remade The Wrong Man later. I'm like, I should remake this when I'm 60. Same concept, start over. I'm sure it'll be about something very different just because I've experienced some life. So yeah, and there's, this is how directors end up with a style. It's things you like. I want to do that shot again, but better. And there's a few visual moments I've tried to work on and repeat in other movies, only because what is a shot? A shot is it's like a sentence in prose. You're trying to communicate something with rhythm and meaning and all these different elements of a sentence. And sometimes you stumble on a sentence that's uniquely your way of speaking, and you're like, oh, that's different. And you try to pursue it. Or if you hate it, you try to push away from it. I mean, having a perspective on one's work is not easy.
Yeah.
This is what I've learned. What I've learned is everybody knows more about my films than I do on a very fundamental level. I have no perspective. And my original plan of what the movies mean is not that it's irrelevant, but art goes out into the world. People fold it into their own experiences. And it means something different to all of them. And that's the whole point. So for me, I still see the day's work and what we could have done differently and, things like that. Even 20 years later.
Yeah.
I'm not a rewatcher of my films.
Yeah. Even just now reflecting on the idea that this was coming out in 2004, I remember being in the States in 2004. And I remember sort of George Bush's America and freedom fries and the invasion of Iraq and this very intense climate of, this anti-Arab sentiment among the most liberal circles. It was anti-Arab. It was completely in vogue, right? And I can't imagine the idea of being a working creative in the center of media, trying to tell stories from your perspective, right? As a writer director. Has that changed over 20 years? Do you feel like it's you needed to not be sort of an Arab director 20 years ago, and now you're more comfortable being one?
Sorry, there was an internet connection problem. We lost each other for a second.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear. You're saying it was a very racist time. What was that like?
Yeah, what was that like now? And 20 years later, do you feel like there's more appetite for narratives and stories from the Arab world that there very much wasn't 20 years ago?
Absolutely. There's a lot more appetite. There's a lot more films coming out from various Arab countries. Since then, also, the digital revolution has completely happened and things have gotten easier. I mean, one of the last jobs I had before I became a film director was I was a PA on the show Family Feud, which filmed in the Valley. My job was to pick up contestants at the airport, take them to the game show. And that season, all the families were coming from Boston. In fact, the flight they took to Los Angeles was the same flight, the 9/11 flight that was headed from Boston to Los Angeles. So after 9/11 happened, I found out later that there was a lot of conversations between the executive producers and producers, non-producers, saying, well, maybe Omar should not be picking up these people at the airport. Like maybe he'll scare the shit. I don't know what they thought. Like, oh, maybe they don't want to be met by an Arab guy at the other end. And to my I was really moved by this. All the other PAs were like, no, you cannot do that. That is totally racist. We will not take any part of this. And then it never happened. But I found out retroactively that people were scared and other people stuck up for me.
What is the chance that they just didn't want to drive to the airport themselves?
Yeah, no, there's other white people they can send to the airport. But that's America in a nutshell. You've got a lot of reactionaries and then you've got a lot of cool people sticking up for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was very different. And you don't really experience racism. Like if there's racism, it's not like you'll have the meeting, they'll bring you in and then tell you to fuck off. Pardon my French. You just won't have the meeting.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know. I'm sure there was a lot of stigma. And, but yeah, I mean, my script ended up in the States by going through a workshop in France called Equinox. Yeah. And then I met my agent there. I sort of went around a lot of the gatekeepers. It's all very...
For Final Cut, specifically. Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about what was your student, your sort of a thesis, I guess, final project in university at Emerson, which became Grand Theater, which the full name Grand Theater, A Tale of Beirut, which even today is a revered documentary. And in fact, it is very much a revered documentary. And you can find it in parts on YouTube. And the reason why I'll tell you a really sweet story. Actually, I don't know if I ever told you this. A few years ago, at one of the afikra events in Beirut, the old school grassroots community events where people present on stuff, in the middle of the Thawra in 2019, 2020, with economic collapse, we did this special event where people were trying to present on topics, historical topics that they thought could help us make sense of today. And somebody presented their review of the documentary. And I was in the background. I had no idea they were going to do this. And I was like, oh my God, that's how I watch the movie.
That's great.
So yeah, I mean, are you surprised by me hearing me say that? Do people come up to you in Lebanon and be like, oh my God, I love this documentary?
No. I mean, my friends and certain family members, but I need to put a better quality version on YouTube. But no, I have not heard people talk about it. And that's nice. That's what I'm telling you. It goes out into the world and it enters people's hearts and you don't necessarily know. But yeah, I mean, this was filmed in 1998, which in retrospect now seems like a very interesting transitional time. The music was done by your brother.
Yeah.
Elias Mohana, who had never scored a movie before. I don't know why I thought of him, but I love the music for the movie. Me
too. Yeah.
I love it. And I had access because my mother is a theater writer, actress and director. So I had a way into that subject matter. So that's a good, if you want like something to tell aspiring filmmakers, the reason I made that movie was I had access to that place. Yeah. So, same with Madina. I mean,
for the people who don't know about it, tell the story of, so it takes place in post-Civil War Beirut, 1998. Yeah. Tell the story of what this documentary is about.
Well, the documentary is a 30-minute documentary about the history of this theater called the Grand Théâtre, the Grand Theater, which was built during the French Mandate and ended up during the Civil War on the Khat Tamas, the green line between East and West Beirut. And it tells the story of Lebanon's history, especially the war, through the story of this theater. So it sort of parallel mirrors the history of the theater and the history of Lebanon. During the Civil War, it was sort of a neutral zone. Before the war, it had all the class divisions that existed in Lebanon. After the war, it was an abandoned husk. I think it still is. They keep trying to make plans to do something with it, and they haven't.
Yeah.
And, I was trying to find something to say about Lebanon. And it's a very visually interesting place. It's more of an essay film, which is the same with Madina, I think. My documentaries are very sort of, the reason I brought up F for Fake as a favorite film is they're very much personal essays with documentary elements, but they're making a case, like they're making an argument. They're not historical.
I think they're meditations.
Yes, they're meditative. Sure.
So please, Hamad, I'm asking you on camera, please upload a better version of this, a full version on YouTube that people want to watch it. And
now I know I will definitely do that. Kawalis.
Yeah. And the reason why it's also, I think, really powerful is because it's funny, when I think about 1998 now, I think of it as right after the Civil War.
Right.
But in 1998, it didn't feel like it was right after the Civil War. It felt like it was many years after the Civil War.
Right. It's true.
Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, at the time it felt like, the Civil War is behind us. We're in this, literally there were cranes everywhere and construction going on. And it turns out, actually, we're still in the Civil War. So it's not that it was ever over. It just took on a different shape. The struggle of art versus chaos is very Lebanese, very human, and it takes place everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, you make the case for it being, or you outline how the theater is this metaphor for Lebanon, right? And it becomes this porn house at some point, and it completely degrades. And then, like, the interesting note afterwards is then it becomes Solidaire, which is this like soulless place, which is like even more of a degradation. So talk to me a little bit about the new project, Two Cities, Madina 10.
Yes, they both, this Madina 10 and Route 10 ended up finishing around the same time, but I shot Madina 10 in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Worked on it on and off, invited another editor to join me, Zain Abul Husn, who really made a huge impact on the film. It's again, sort of a metaphorical film using a theater.
Yeah.
It's called Madina 10 because it's comparing the two cities of Beirut and the Al Madina Theater, which is the theater my mother runs in Beirut. And it's sort of
an iconic place.
An iconic place. And it was 2016. We had no president. We had no government. Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
And it's comparing the failure of the Lebanese state with the attempt to succeed on a smaller scale of these improvised family units we create in Lebanon to stay sane. I would say afikra is probably one of them.
Yeah.
So the group of actors and directors and technicians and people who work at the Al Madina Theater are trying to just do their job well and with respect to each other in non-sectarian ways. And the country does not. And you see one thing doesn't work and the other thing does. It's kind of a propaganda film, but for a good cause. And it's been showing on LBC a lot. We gave it to LBC to show, and they were going to show it once. And now they showed it 4 or 5 times. They keep showing it. The issue, it's so relevant now.
Are they going to put it online anywhere?
They're not, but as soon as their period is done, I'm going to just post it somewhere.
Okay, please do, because I think there will be a lot of people who don't have LBC who are outside the country.
Yeah, it was on BBC Arabic, and then it was on LBC, and then I'd like it to just be available online for everyone.
Yeah.
And that was really, the reaction to that is it showed in the theater a couple of times in theatrical screenings in Lebanon, and I got a lot of messages, a lot of people really moved by the movie.
Yeah.
Really feeling, which was not, I've been away from Lebanon for 25 years. It felt really good to make something that can connect with my home audience, that I'm not so completely, left the farm.
Well, I mean, you know, Omar, it's really funny that you said that because I think one of the feelings that people would probably most resonate with people is the feeling of being disconnected, because it's not only those who their bodies have left Lebanon, or whose bodies who have left the region. I'll even broaden it. But so many of us are forced to mentally leave and emotionally leave the region because of the tyranny of of our governments and the tyranny of the entire infrastructure.
Right.
And you can't emotionally or mentally or professionally and oftentimes physically stay here. It's not a place to house yourself. And so you can be born and bred and remain here and feel disconnected. And so the idea of a filmmaker and an artist trying to reconnect through their art is so universal. Sadly, it's such a universal experience.
That's interesting. Yeah, that is the common thread between us. All of us is like, and the film is about. I mean, they have some things in common. Route 10. You know, now I've made enough films that I look back, I'm like, oh, these things have some things in common, which were not deliberate. And usually, it's someone else's job to look at things and find commonalities. But I was surprised that there's, from the final cut becoming Madina 10 and Route 10, they're all about sort of corrupt father figures, be it an actual father in Route 10, or the Lebanese government, or again, an actual father in the final cut, or a father possessed by a demon in Becoming. I happen to have a great father, so it's not about my father. But, I don't think you can live in the Middle East without thinking like you've been betrayed by the patriarchy. So to put it in clear terms. And I was surprised that.
Well, in Route 10, it's clearly about something bigger, because I mean, like the magazine cover and I can't go anywhere without seeing our name on the side of the street. It's very clear that that's like capital P patriarchy. All right. I want to talk a little bit about some of the films that you send over. We like to do this gimmick on movie night where we ask some of the filmmakers to mention some of the films that influenced them. So we sent you a list of some categories and you fill those out. So the first category is the film that film students must watch. What is the film?
This is a film called Exotica, written and directed by Adam Agoyan from 94 or 95. Came out right when I was entering film school. I think it's a little forgotten, and it should not be. It's a very beautiful, touching, it's kind of a mystery. I don't want to give anything away. But Exotica is very good at creating a very human, subtle story that's still full of tension. I mean, it uses cinematic techniques and reorganizing time to be as tense as like a whodunit. But it's not. It's very much about people and their pain and how they react to each other. And I think tension is a good thing in every genre, every medium, humor. Films are really good at creating tension. And this is just a unique way of doing it in a different kind of human drama. And then a couple of years later, he made a film called The Sweet Hereafter, which took his temporal distortion ideas from Exotica and then redid them on a larger level. That film is extremely beautiful. But this is smaller and more achievable maybe for young filmmakers.
Cool.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a very beautiful film.
Okay, nice. Next category is a film that always makes you laugh. So what's the film?
This is Hail Caesar. This is very good, makes you laugh. It might be the last Joel and Ethan Coen movie now that they've sort of broken up. It's a comedy about the film business in the 40s. And it's just something me and my wife watch on a very regular basis. It's really funny. But it's also kind of about, all these crazy artistic people coming together to try to make meaning out of their lives. They may or may not succeed, but the attempt is kind of the point. I love George Clooney playing an idiot.
I was going to say George Clooney in this film is so goofy and he hams it up big time. And it's fun. It
takes into these, big themes of sort of socialism and religion. In the background of the film, they're making a Jesus epic.
Yeah.
And actually, the film is about faith in things that don't give you anything back, like the arts or religion. So it takes a very silly, farcical setup, and it's also got some meat on it. I think a lot of comedies don't have anything going on. It's also visually gorgeous, and they take the opportunity to recreate multiple kinds of old Hollywood movies, Busby Berkeley kind of movies and musicals. And so I just find it really, really funny, and I can't get enough of it.
Yeah. Okay. The next category is a film that you rewatch all the time.
All right. This I wanted to bring to people's attention because I don't think enough people who like thrillers or action movies have seen this movie. Have you seen this movie?
No, say the movie for the podcast listeners.
Yes. This is a movie called The Train with Burt Lancaster from 1964, directed by the great underrated John Frankenheimer, who directed The Manchurian Candidate and a great movie called Seconds. But The Train is another, it's an early moving vehicle action movie, much like Route 10. The original is maybe Stagecoach, which I also rewatched. Yeah. I watched a lot of these movies preparing to do Route 10.
Nice.
Like someone chasing someone else is sort of the essence of, action cinema. I find this one particularly beautiful because it's about at the end of World War II, the Germans are losing, and there's a Nazi general who's trying to get a bunch of art out of France to keep, beautiful art that moves him deeply, this Nazi general. And then Burt Lancaster plays a guy who works for the French resistance, whose job it is to keep that train from leaving France with the art. But the Burt Lancaster character doesn't like art and doesn't see why he should be risking his life for a bunch of paintings. So the fact that the villain appreciates there's an interesting discussion there about the value of art and human life, and all sort of rolled up in a very fast-moving, very stylish, black and white, wide lens thriller. And if you like Die Hard or Speed or Duel or Panic or My Movie, The Train. It's
cool.
Sort of the earliest Die Hard I could find.
Amazing. And then the last one we have is the film that most changed how you think.
This is a film called F for Fake by Orson Welles from 1972, I think. And it's an essay documentary. It's a personal essay documentary about himself and about the nature of film and illusion and truth and lies. He takes it's built out of things he shot. He also took another documentary and recut it and put it into his film. There's nothing quite like F for Fake. And I saw it at the right age. I was 19 or 20. I thought I'd seen all the Orson Welles masterpieces. Turns out this is, look, it's not Citizen Kane level, but it's my second favorite Orson Welles movie. And a totally different style, very 70s. And it just revealed to me the subjectivity of truth, which seems like, you should know that. But I didn't, it really communicated to me the subjectivity of truth and how cinema can construct meaning and deconstruct it playfully. And but be careful, watch out. Movies can do things you don't even realize they're doing.
Amazing.
Also his voice, I just have a crush on Orson Welles. So
it's funny. As you were doing the synopsis of this, like your take on what it was, it's like that could be the description of Grand Theater, actually.
Oh God, yeah. I saw this and a couple of other movies, and then I went and made Grand Theater very much with this in mind. Very much.
Very cool.
So yeah, learn from the best.
We're going to do the rapid fire quick Q&A, then we're going to wrap it up. Okay, so the first one is, what have you been watching these days?
What have I been watching? I have been rewatching all the Brian De Palma movies.
Really interesting. That's cool.
Yeah, which to me is just like pure pleasure candy. Yeah. So this last couple of weeks, I watched Sisters, Dressed to Kill, Blowout, Casualties of War. I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah.
No one does sort of suspense sequences and black humor like Brian De Palma. And
nice.
There's a lot of him in Route 10 and The Final Cut for sure. So I'm just watching those because I just wanted something inspiring and enjoyable and that I haven't revisited in a while.
Nice. Who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
Well, shadowing them for a day implies they have to have a day of some interest. So like not a writer. They're not just making toast, eating it over the sink.
Yeah, and hating themselves.
So, I would have loved to shadow Monty Python for a day. Like while they were making their films from the 70s, just that collection of talents. There's never been that group of people like that in visual mediums. So yeah, I think Monty Python.
So I asked you this earlier. So what do people most misunderstand about your work?
I don't know, but I do know that because, Arab cinema is like this new movie, Route 10, there's a lot of people saying, oh, this is not Saudi enough. Or, this issue of authenticity that comes up with emerging cinemas. And what's misunderstood about my work, and I think everyone's work, is that we don't represent anyone but ourselves. I mean, I feel about myself.
Yeah.
I cannot, you know, I'm making my film, and just because you need to see it through a nationalist lens doesn't mean I did. And I understand why things are organized that way, but it doesn't mean it's fair. So for me, it's that's for me is I think the misunderstood thing. You know, I'm not American enough for the American film industry. I don't feel like I'm Arab enough for the Arab film industry. I do feel a little bit like an in-between nowhere land. And then I meet other directors and they all feel the same way. So it's
exactly.
Maybe that's what it feels like.
You know, it's funny because I feel through movie night, through the series, we've interviewed a lot of people who are interested in genre and specifically interested in genre in Arabic and sort of taking what does it look like when we take a Korean horror flick and do it, and what about if we take like a very sort of like a classic Dazed and Confused type movie and use that, or like a big mystery, like a Pulp Fiction-y mystery, and it's funny because those are all genres that have traditions elsewhere, but we repurpose stuff and we remix stuff all the time. And so I was curious, are you interested in doing more genre in Arabic, or was Route 10 something that was like, okay, this came about, I'll do this?
Oh, I'd love to. Genre in Arabic is a dream. And I was so happy to get to do it this time.
Yeah.
And genre movies are like the folk music of the film industry, you know? Like the Rolling Stones can cover the blues. We can cover the road movie and bring new things to it and execute it well. But for example, like the Korean cinema was really sort of exploded onto the stage with Old Boy in 2003.
Yeah.
Old Boy is based on a Japanese comic book. So this authenticity thing is almost never true. You know, Kurosawa is the most famous Japanese filmmaker of his time. At the time, he was considered too Western. And, you know, he was adapting Dashiell Hammett and being inspired by John Ford. We are inspired by other artists. It's not
spaghetti westerns are
westerns are, first of all, the best westerns you've ever seen and the most mutant, like, mongrel thing on earth. And they're better than what came before them in many ways. This sort of borrowing, bastardized thing is the point, you know? And it doesn't mesh well with purity, whatever form it comes in. So
yeah. And then the last question I'll ask you is, outside of film, outside of your profession, where do you find your inspiration? Who inspires you?
Music, probably. I love well, let's see. This is going to sound very I forgot the word. I mean, like, since the pandemic started, I'm like, all right, this is the time to finally get into Stephen Sondheim. I know you're going to appreciate this because my first splashes of musicals were in your house because your mom loves musicals. And but I love musicals. Speaking of genre, I'd love to do an Arabic musical. How cool. Something I've been dreaming about for years. But yeah, I love Stephen Sondheim. And these last 2 years have been very Sondheim-y. I've been also reading books about him. It's such a different medium that it's easier to learn from things that are quite different. He's the master of words, the melodies, the stories, the tone, the shifts in tone, but also the life story, the failures, the successes, the powering through. Yeah. It's just good to see artists that you've never met, but you feel speak your language. For sure. Well, that wraps us up. If anybody wants to find the film, you can find it on Netflix. Go over to YouTube and search for the clip that Ahmad is going to upload shortly of the Grand Theater and watch. I have to rescan the negative. It's not that easy. It's a print. That's how old this is. The film is a print, a 16 millimeter print. So I have to do a bunch of things to it. Yeah. But I have faith that this will happen. It will happen, yes. You have put some pressure on me in public. I'm putting some pressure. I want this to be seen by more people. Ahmad, thanks so much for doing this. I really, really appreciate it. It was a pleasure. Thank you.